Wonderful. Glad you could make it. Yes, it is I, the conspicuous Moo. And it is time. It's time to do the whole Brewmastery Shadowlands experience. So we're going to be going over a lot of topics today. This is going to be rather a long video, and yes, I will put timestamps down on the bottom. We will go through talents, we will go through covenants and soulbinds, we will go through conduits, legendary powers, stat priorities, enchants, all of that good stuff. I think it's probably time to get cracking. So some of you may be absolutely brand new to the whole Brewmaster thing, so welcome to the family. We're all a bit odd, probably because we're out of our skulls for most of the time. So let's at first go over the positives. What are the strengths of the Brewmaster class? Well, I think most people already identify Brewmasters with the stagger mechanic, which is the method by which we take damage, absorb a small portion of it to the face, and then stagger the rest into a dot that ticks for 10 seconds. So how much stagger will depend on how much agility you have. So agility, which will be all of our gear anyway, is our main stat when it comes to mitigating physical damage, and a small part of magic damage as well. We do have stronger magic mitigation with Celestial Brew, which is a new addition to our toolkit. Basically, the system goes that we use Purifying Brew to clear off some of the stagger dot, the damage that we have been saving, and that creates a stack of Purified Chi. This Purified Chi stacks up to 10 times, and each stack is worth 20% additional strength to the Celestial Brew, which is essentially what Guard used to be, if you remember that from Mists of Pandaria. Now that is fairly strong magic mitigation, particularly if you have 3 or 4 stacks up, and it does make us a lot more tankier when it comes to magic damage. It also has to be said that, it is a fairly simple rotation to do, at least, at the absolute skill floor. It's very easy to get shuffle up, get your defensives up, start purifying brews, and, doing a little damage and zipping around the room. It's not as simple as a demon hunter or a bear, but it is still relatively straightforward compared to some of the other tanks, so it's usually a fairly good start for anyone who's looking to tank in the first place. We are a very, very highly mobile class. That is a very, very fun aspect. It can get a little out of control sometimes, but it's great for repositioning, it's great for getting out of trouble, and it's excellent for kiting, so yes, all very, very strong. Monks also bring a unique buff to the table across all 3 specs. Mystic Touch will increase the damage you do with physical damage to an enemy by 5%, so that's very nice indeed. It's the only one of its kind in the game at the moment, so we will, generally speaking, in larger groups, there will always be at least one monk to provide this benefit. You just have to hope that you're that one monk. And unfortunately, unfortunately for Windwalkers and Mistweavers anyway, Brewmaster appears to be the strongest of the 3 monk specs at the moment. We've had a much, much easier ride in beta development for Shadowlands than our sister specs. So it does mean that if you do need a monk in any kind of content, then you're probably better off with a Brewmaster now than you are the other 2. It's sad, but it's true. But we've got to have some weaknesses as well. One of the recurring weaknesses with Brewmaster has always been our healing. We are not a very great self-healing class like a DK. We are, Vivify spammers in between pulls when we're out by ourselves. And we do have a number of different tools in order to heal, but it's more of a package altogether. If everything comes together, you can self-heal quite well. It just, for the most part, it comes in dribs and drabs, and compared to a lot of other tanks, we don't have that ability to heal ourselves all that well. So we do tend to be reliant upon healers. We're not going to stay alive indefinitely just hitting Deathstrike, and that's just something that Brewmasters can't do. We are vulnerable to certain types of damage. While we're excellent at physical mitigation, and we have Celestial Brew up every once in a while to flatten out any physical and magical damage that's coming in, we are rather vulnerable to bleeds, as it does tend to be a dot, and because it ignores armor, it is treated as a magic ability. This means that, if you've already got a stagger dot on you, then you have a bleed dot as well. You're now double dotting, and your healers are wondering why you're dropping like a stone. The same thing happens with intermittent magic damage. We do have some magic stagger, but it's not very much, and it's not going to be terribly effective against, you know, mostly dot mechanics, but anything that pulses at a fairly regular rate is going to get us into some kind of trouble. And of course, if we get nukes outside of Celestial Brew being available, then we can also be very vulnerable to magic damage, although it has to be said there are a few ways to mitigate those as well. So we do have some cooldowns. We have two main ones. We have another one that we can talent into, but generally speaking, this is not a cooldown based class. Fortifying Brew is available every 3.5 to 4 minutes, depending on, you know, how often you're using your brews. I mean, our cooldowns are not very exciting at all. Zen Meditation it's a 5-minute cooldown. It kind of feels like a classic ability that they forgot to remove in Cataclysm. Most brewmasters who've spent some time around the spec will say they've had a pretty difficult relationship with Zen Meditation because it's been pretty niche for a very, very long time. So yeah, if you're looking for major cooldowns and lots of little short ones, this is not the class for you. Limited group utility is a little controversial because, you know, well, what about Leg Sweep? Well, yes, Leg Sweep is very nice. And Ring of Peace, absolutely, but that is talented. It is not a baseline ability. And Tiger's Lust, well, beyond that, you know, we don't really have a lot of group utility. We don't bring a lot to a group that other classes can bring in larger amounts and make themselves far more useful. You know, the Mistweavers and the Windwalkers have the same kind of problems because we basically all have the same utility set, and if you all bring the same thing, then you don't really need to bring more than one monk, maybe two tops. Finally, and this is probably the most controversial opinion I've got on this, you know, we have been accustomed as brewmasters to be a pretty much mandatory choice as one of the front two tanks in any raid situation. Now, the other tanks have kind of caught up with us, and you know, they're still tanking in very different ways from us, but they are a lot stronger, and they're all looking pretty good and pretty competitive. And I think that, you know, we're no longer the automatic choice that we used to be. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you know, you will be not as in demand as you might have been in Battle for Azeroth. So, what's basically changed? What are the important aspects of Brewmaster that have undergone a revamp? Well, not an awful lot, but we will start with Ironskin Brew, which has gone bye-byes. Ironskin Brew, of course, was a buff that increased the amount that you staggered, and it was basically a maintenance button you pressed every few seconds just to make sure you had enough. So it wasn't a particularly interesting button to press, and they have replaced it with Shuffle, which we'll get into in a second. So Celestial Brew has come in. It is essentially Guard, but they called it Celestial Brew, so whatever. It is not reducible through brew usage, which is a little unusual, but okay. But it is a very, very welcome addition to the toolset, and it's going to be absolutely crucial when it comes to the way that we tank in Shadowlands. Blackout Strike has gone, Blackout Kick has returned, and it is now a 4-second cooldown as opposed to a 3-second cooldown. Now, this will not materially affect you long term. It will be a little bit janky just to start off with because you're used to the 3 seconds, but you will get used to it. It's only really noticeable if you take Blackout Combo as a talent, which at the moment you probably shouldn't be doing anyway, but don't let me stop you if you want to take it. As mentioned previously, Shuffle has returned. Now, Shuffle is very nice. It is now a passive. You basically get granted Shuffle, which just increases your stagger level, and it comes off Keg Smash and Blackout Kick and Spinning Crane Kick. So, you know, these are abilities that you will probably be using as part of your rotation anyway, and if you just use the first two of those abilities, you'll be able to keep Shuffle up for as long as you like. It does have a cap of 15 seconds, but by and large, you know, you don't have to worry about pressing Ironskin Brew anymore. It's all built into the actual spec. We did get a few abilities back. Some of them were absolutely awful, like Clash. Why was that ever a good idea? Answers on the back of a postage stamp. But we did get things like Invoking Nizal, Angry Dave, who is now a 3-minute cooldown and has a few extra whizzy abilities. His threat, his taunting has been taken away, but he now has the ability to do more AoE damage depending on how much you stagger. So, you know, he doesn't do a terrible large amount of damage, but he is entertaining and he's very beautiful. And Touch of Death has come back to Brewmasters as well, which is a hilarious ability, and I had no idea how much I missed it until it actually came back. There's also a legendary that shortens the cooldown on it. At the moment it stands at a stock 3 minutes, and the rank 2 of the ability will enable you to reduce some of your stagger by 200% of the damage you do with Touch of Death. So it also has that built-in useful synergistic ability. Right, so now let's get into the guts of how this is all going to pull together. We're going to start with the talents. Now, generally speaking, the talents haven't had an awful lot of work done to them. It's not exactly been a top priority of Blizzard. They were far too busy working on Covenant abilities they were going to grind into the ground before we went live with Shadowlands. Yay! Don't worry, the Shadowlands abilities were not alone in that respect. They also did it to soulbinds and conduits. Pretty much everything new. Awesome. So, talents will be coloured green, yellow and red according to the values that I place upon them. I should also point out that this is what the general Brewmaster community seems to be telling me as well. So it's not just my experience and me saying, oh yeah, you must take Chi-Wave. It's amazing. I would not do that to you. If you do see the Moo button, that is the one I'm going to start out with for Shadowlands. I'm not really pursuing a traditional build here. It's a little bit off because I've found a different way of playing basically while I was playing around in beta, and I want to see how that works. And you know, at the moment I'm enjoying it more than the traditional rotation. And also my choices are based upon, you know, I'm not expecting to do heroic or mythic raiding first out, or doing, you know, 20 plus keys, where, you know, my actual talent choices and covenant choices and conduits and soulbinds would actually make some sort of a difference, because if you're underneath that level, it doesn't matter. So if you are doing high level stuff, then stick with the green recommendations, so that way you won't upset anyone and say, well, you know, the Moo told me to take Chi-Wave, and I totally did not tell you to do that. So, nice easy start, Eye of the Tiger. Wow, it's incredibly boring, but it does not take a keybind. It's 8 seconds of a little bit of healing, a little bit of damage. It does something for Tiger Palms, and Tiger Palm is an ability that really does need some love. It is single target, so you can't hit multiple different, you know, you can't hit A over here and then hit B 2 seconds later and get 2 sets of it. It's only on 1, so whatever you hit last, that's it. So because its passive is not particularly outstandingly interesting, but it is the most effective, and you know, if you are not going straight into dungeons and doing nothing but dungeons until 60, then you know, Eye of the Tiger is fine, and that's probably what I'm going to go with. Now, Chi Burst is the AoE option. It's the sort of like dungeon option, if you like. It does have a cast time that's not particularly long, and you can still dodge. You still have avoidance while you're casting it, which is important. It does acquire the extra keybind, and you know, why am I bringing up keybinds? Because we've got so much stuff back, it's rather difficult to fit it all in our bars now, you know. So, you know, it's difficult to fit all of this stuff into the rotation if you add too many additional buttons, so you may find Chi Burst difficult to fit in. It does give a little more group utility because you can heal everyone as well, because you know, you'll turn the mob around obviously as the tank, as all tanks should be doing, and then Chi Burst your way through, so you know, you'll be picking up the damage, and you'll be healing your party members. Not for a great amount, but you know, every little helps. The disadvantage of that, of course, is that, you know, if you're like me, then you sort of cast Chi Burst, you watch it go off into the distance and snag another pack of mobs, and you go, oh joy! And then you have to deal with them as well. So it does have the ability, kind of like the Dave statue, to grab you a little extra attention if you're not using it properly, so there you go. Now, we've already talked about Chi-Wave. It's not a talent, it doesn't exist, it's in red for a reason. Chi-Wave's healing and damage is not impressive. Chi-Wave is not controlled by you. You hit Chi-Wave, it bounces all over the place, it will break the CC if you've put any in place. Doesn't really care if there's CC there or not. Please don't take Chi-Wave. You'll make a Moo cry. Okay? Okay. Level 25, Movement. If you are familiar with how Battle for Azeroth talents went, nothing has changed here at all. Tiger's Lust is the one that is traditionally taken because it is a snare removal and it is a speed increase. You can use it on other people, so it's a tiny bit of group utility as well. You know, if your healer's falling behind, just lust them so he can catch up with you. So that's nice. If you're a selfish old cow like me though, you'll go Chi Torpedo because it looks awesome and you zip around, you can stack it to twice and you'll be doing 30% increased running speed. And you can annoy your healer, and it's great for getting out of, you know, AoE effects. Oh, he's about to cast and get out, and you just zoom out. It looks superb. That's what I'm going to be taking because it's just more fun for me, and I'm all about the fun. Celerity is a third charge of roll, and that is it. That's all there is to it. I have now been spoiled so much by Chi Torpedo that, you know, just the very idea of rolling is just like, yeah, that's so Mists of Pandaria, darling. It's not a bad talent. It's just not terribly interesting. Alright then, level 30. Now Light Brewing was changed to 20% passive reduction of the cooldowns of your Purifying and your Celestial Brews. So Celestial Brew will now be 48 seconds instead of 1 minute, and your Purifying Brews will be coming up more regularly. And it's the best talent in this row. Quite comfortably. I'm going to be taking it. I think most people are going to take it, unless they want to experiment with Black Ox Brew, which is the middle ability, which is kind of good. If you have a very high energy build, for example, you know, it does have the ability to give you a full bar again if you're really using it in that respect. It is reducible by cooldown reduction, so, you know, if you've got Cake Smash and Tiger Palm going, then, you know, it will come back sooner. Another situation, you do Celestial Brew as a huge nuke, another nuke is coming after this, you don't have anything to protect yourself, all your cooldowns are like burnt out, you can use Black Ox Brew, put another Celestial Brew on there. It's not going to be a powerful one because you don't have any stacks of Purified Chi, but you could do that as well if you wanted to. At the moment, the general opinion seems to be moving away from Black Ox Brew and just going Light Brewing. And no discussion has ever entered for Spitfire whatsoever. Now, this is a world PvP ability, because you tie it with Incendiary Breath for the lulls, out in world PvP, and that's it. That's its only point. Tiger Palm already does very low damage, and, you know, you're not supposed to be using it to try and proc Breath of Fire, which is a very low damage and very low damage reduction ability as well. So terrible. Please don't take Spitfire. Please. Level 35 is a little more balanced. It's more balanced than level 30 anyway. But Ring of Peace is way out in front still. You know, a lot of people are now calling for this to be one of those baseline abilities because it's just like, it's kind of iconic to the spec, and the reason it's become iconic is because it's been the only talent worth taking really in this row for so long. And that is a shame. It's so good that it kind of pushes out the Summon Black Ox statue, which is another of our signature abilities. But, you know, if you can kite, you can save your healer. You know, if there's melee going after your healer, you just put the Ring of Peace in them and they just all bounce back, bounce back, bounce back. You can force people up against walls with it. You know, if you're picking up a chest in the world, you can just go, oh, no, I don't think, no, boing, boing, boing. Think, ooh, very nice. War resources. So, you know, it has a lot of uses. Some of them are a little unconventional, and it's very, very good indeed. So, yeah, I mean, I'll be taking Ring of Peace, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because Dave gets left behind in that case, and Dave, of course, is some Black Ox statue. You sort of plonk him in the middle of the room, and he's supposed to have a 20-yard range that I have never believed, because he pulses threat, and things from other dimensions seem to get pulled towards Dave. And he does have the AoE taunt as well. So, you know, this is another thing I think really should be baseline. It's a very, very Brewmastery only ability. But, you know, for some reason they've made it a talent, probably because they lack imagination in huge amounts. But unfortunately it's on the same talent row as Ring of Peace, which makes it pretty much untakeable. And finally, Tiger Tail Sweep. Now, I've very generously put this in yellow because I don't know of anyone who's taken this over the other two abilities. The only thing I can think of for Tiger Tail Sweep is that, you know, it can possibly have PvP benefits if you need leg sweep more regularly and at a wider range. But you know, when this talent was put in, it was already taking the mick, because it was essentially the leg sweep we had before you nerfed it, and then you brought it back as a talent, and even then it wasn't quite as good as the original. So I don't know why you would take Tiger Tail Sweep unless you're obsessed with leg sweeping people. Do see a physician if that has occurred. Yeah, otherwise, you know, the other two options are probably a lot better. Level 40 is my favourite row, and the reason is because all three of these options are actually usable. And this is a very rare occurrence in the Brewmaster talent tree. So all three of these have different situational uses, which is great, which means, you know, there's actual prospect of you changing into another one when you need it. So Bob and Weave has been around for a very, very long time. It is essentially the Legion stagger ring that stretches out stagger by an additional 3 seconds. So, you know, that stagger dot is not having as much in each dot. Very, very good for taking high amounts of physical damage, and that's what this is essentially good for. It's kind of suffered as a direct result of the way that we change in mitigation. Now that we're purifying so much more, we don't really need an additional 3 seconds of stagger. You know, we don't need to draw that dot out because we are purifying so often now that it's never going to reach a point where that makes that much of a difference. So that's its main objection. That's why I would only really go with Bob and Weave if you're getting hit really, really hard. Healing Elixir is the one I'm going to be taking. It is usually the traditional one that you do take when you start a new expansion, just because it gives you that tiny little extra piece of healing out in the world. I mean, we've got Vivify, and Vivify has been buffed, so it's actually stronger than it was in Battle for Azeroth. So, you know, it's not as much of an issue out in the field anymore. But, you know, if you're planning on leveling as Brewmaster, I certainly am. You know, it is a decent ability, and Dampen Harm is available if you feel that you need a third cooldown for whatever reason. If you, I mean, I would take this in a more magic heavy environment, you know, where Celestial Brew is on cooldown. I can't get to anything. There's no way I'm going to be able to stop this damage unless I use an additional cooldown. It is kind of counterintuitive because Brewmaster isn't traditionally a cooldown based spec, but you know, it is very useful, and it does get stronger the bigger the hit that you take, and it does work on all types of damage. So, you know, it's quite versatile, and you know, in those situations, you know, high Mythic Plus keys, we just need that little bit extra survivability. That's probably going to be the one to go to. Level 45. Now this is where I go off the beaten track a little bit, because the top choice is Rushing Jade Wind, which is an 8-second whizzle around you, AoE ability, does quite a lot of damage. It'll be second or third on your overall damage meters. It's energy free, and it just needs to be refreshed. It is incredibly dull to use, and it hasn't had any real changes at all, apart from a target cap being applied to it. It now only hits 6, I believe. So that's why I've decided I'm not going to go with Rushing Jade Wind, because that's just too dull for me, and I'm going to go with Exploding Keg, which is much more fun. It is a range pull. It is a 40-yard range. It doesn't have the, you know, it's the Legion artifact ability. It doesn't have the exploding fiery effect yet. I have bothered them about this. But, you know, it is a lot of fun to chuck around and just watch it topple over and then boof. So I find that a lot of fun, and then I'm using Spinning Crane Kick more in place of Rushing Jade Wind. Now that is an entirely odd decision, but it's one that I want to try out. So that, you know, that's the way I'm going, and that's why I'm not taking Rushing Jade Wind. You know, if you are in progression content, to, you know, you're pushing high levels, or you just want to do more damage in general, then take Rushing Jade Wind, absolutely. And if you're kiting, take Special Delivery. There's not really any other reason to take Special Delivery, because while it doesn't have like a target cap, so it can potentially do infinite damage, you do have to get a lot of mobs in order for it to actually do more damage than the other two abilities. So yeah, kiting, necrotic, stuff like that. Otherwise, you won't be taking a Special Delivery much. I mean, you will be in certain circumstances, but for the most part, you'll be taking one of the top two. Oh, level 50. We're finally here, and oh, look at that. High Tolerance is top again. Disappointing, but we don't need a lot of haste, but what haste we do need we get from high tolerance. 5% on green stagger, 10% on yellow stagger, 15% on red stagger. So it does get stronger the higher your stagger, which is excellent. It does have additional 5% of stagger built into it as well, so it's a very good defensive option, and it does have some offensive potential as well, because it will be reducing the cooldown of Keg Smash and Purifying Brew. So you will be able to do more brew reductions and have more purified chi stacks for your Celestial Brew. It is dull, it is passive, it is still the best on this line, unfortunately. Blackout combo, as I mentioned earlier, if you haven't skipped to this part already, Blackout combo is a little bit janky because they changed the cooldown of Blackout Kick from 3 seconds to 4 seconds, and so it's not nearly as smooth as it was in BFA, and it's one of those talent choices where if you really, really want to, yes, you can get slightly higher brew reduction, and yes, you can do slightly more single target damage, but is it really worth it? Probably not. I think even the min-maxers are going to be going for high tolerance, because at the end of the day, even if you get everything absolutely perfect, it doesn't really make that much of a difference, and you really do want a talent to make a difference if you're going to change your rotation up like that. Celestial Flames came in to replace Guard, which of course is now Celestial Brew, but at a 30% proc rate chance is dreadful. And the bonus, you get an additional 5% damage reduction. Breath of Fire, that low damage reduction is up to 10%. Another problem is that it isn't working properly, so the actual stack at the moment isn't 10%, it's closer to 4%, so it's even bugged before we go live. A week until we go live, it's still not working. So, I'm sorry, but Celestial Flames is just not an option you should be taking. Now, before we get into the Covenants, let's get into the Conduits quickly. Now, Conduits started off once upon a time, way back in Alpha. They were really quite powerful and interesting. But then Blizzard realised that they couldn't possibly balance all of this nonsense in time, so they ground everything down to mere stubs of what they once were. So, Brewmasters have, as a result, very few actually good conduits to use in Shadowlands. Now, generally speaking, and this is according to your own tastes and flavours, I'm going to suggest things to you that you don't have to adopt. You can say, "Go away, Mr. Moo, you're an idiot," and that's perfectly fine. I am an idiot. So, generally speaking, you want 2 potency conduits. We used to have 3, but they reduced it to 2 because, and at least 1 endurance conduit in your soulbind trees. I say at least 1 because there is at least 1 endurance conduit that seems to be worth taking. All the others are a bit of a toss-up, but yeah, there is 1. And then, a finesse as well, or a second endurance. It's up to you. You only get 4 slots per soulbind tree, so, there are exceptions. I think there's a soulbind where there's an ability called Serrated Spaulders, which is very nice. It does 10% of your overall damage as shadow damage whenever you get attacked. It sounds a little too nice, and I think it's going to get a little too nerfed, even at this late stage, so I'm not recommending it for that reason. But, if you get something like that, that looks really, really good and you really, really want it, then yeah, by all means, give up a potency conduit. They're not that good. They're just better than all the other Dross conduits. So, potency conduits, obviously, throughput, attacking, awesomeness. The greens here are Scalding Brew and half of the Covenant abilities. So, Scalding Brew increases the damage of Keg Smash does under Breath of Fire, which it should be anyway. And then the Covenant Conduit abilities, Imbued Reflections for the Venthea and Bone Marrow Hops for the Necrolord, are both still really, really good at what they do, and they will amp up their respective damage and healing according to ability, so they are strongly recommended as your second potency slot. However, if you have chosen Night Fae or Kyrian, theirs aren't nearly so good. Kyrian got absolutely nuked from orbit the other week, so it's no longer in the recommended section. And Way of the Fae, unfortunately, although it does give a damage increase, the base damage of the ability, Feyline Stomp, is so low that, it's 10% of meh. 10% more mehness. So it's not terribly good either. I'm taking it, but, that's just because I'm obsessed with the Night Fae. So you might want to consider Walk with the Ox. Now that does a little bit of increased damage for invoking Zal, the Black Ox, and good old Angry Dave, and it will reduce the cooldown as well on Angry Dave. Thankfully, endurance conduits are a lot more straightforward. The only one that is really catching anyone's attention at the moment is Harm Denial, which will amp up the healing that you receive by at least 20%. I think it goes up to 50% as a max level conduit, so it will become more potent as Shadowland goes on, and it is a not inconsiderable amount of our healing, the old Ox Orbs, so it is worth doing in that respect. It is way better than everything else here. Celestial Effervescence, increases the abilities that your healing abilities while you have Celestial Brew up. There's not usually that many circumstances where you'll use Celestial Brew and then start spamming healing abilities to get back up again. But if you were in that situation, then this is a decent conduit. I'm still not really sure why you would do that, but anyway. The reds are so red. Evasive Stride, God rest its soul, was a very, very good conduit starting out, and then they completely changed the nature of it. So in order for this conduit to be effective, you need to be in red stagger pretty much all of the time, and even then you have a 2.5% chance to get that stagger tick turned into a heal. It does double dip, but it is at best 2% of overall healing, which is really bad. I mean, if you are running into red stagger a lot, it might possibly be worth it, but from the logs that I've seen, it isn't, and I wouldn't bother. It's very sad, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. Fortifying Ingredients and Grounding Breath, both have the problem that they're not really designed for Brewmasters. They're general endurance conduits, and it really does show. A small shield every time you use Fortifying Brew. We don't use Fortifying Brew all that much, and the shield is less than a Celestial Brew cast. It's not worth it. And the Grounding Breath, I mean, yes, I guess it's kind of nice that you can just sort of stand there and spam Vivify, but as a tank, generally you should be pushing the healing duties onto, the guy in the dress at the back. So you shouldn't really have many situations whereby taking a conduit like that is actually worth it. Alright, finesse conduits. Often a source of ridicule. Dizzying Tumble, I think, is probably actually quite a good one now. I mean, there was a point where the reduced damage was incorporated into the time associated with the stun as well, so you only got a couple of seconds on the end. They fixed that now. Quite useful. So now when you leg sweep, you're going to have 5 or 6 seconds of reduced damage being done to you by those leg swept individuals. Tumbling technique is also kind of nice, every time you blackout kick you get a chance to roll. If you do need the extra mobility, it's another opportunity for a roll. I don't think I'll find many circumstances of that, so I'm going with Dizzying Tumble, but entirely up to you. Swift Transference, if you're good with the ports. I'm not terribly good with Transcendence, so that I probably wouldn't take this. I was very attracted to it initially, but I have changed my mind over time. Now, Lingering Numbness is very much a PvP conduit, so it's great in PvP. It'll slow people down, something rotten, but in PvE it doesn't really have that many useful applications, so I wouldn't be taking it for that. But if you do PvP a lot and you have a soulbind spare, chuck it in there. It's alright. Alright, it's time for some Covenants. Now, I have already expressed my opinion about Covenant choices. Now, unless you are world firsting or doing absolutely insane keys in Mythic Plus, then your Covenant ability is not going to materially affect you that much in any real meaningful way. I will let you know what Covenants are considered best for what type, but at the end of the day you really should be happy with the aesthetic choice that you've made, and if you're not pushing world first, then just pick whatever grabs you. That said, let us begin with the Kyrians, the clean shirts, the Smurfs. So I'm not going Kyrian, as you might have guessed. They're Covenant ability is Weapons of Order, or WOO. 2-minute cooldown, 30-second buff. It does increase your mastery by a whole chunk and resets the cooldown of Keg Smash. Now, if you have taken the Keg Smash Legendary, which gives you 2 charges, it will not restore both charges, just the one. That's just something I thought I would point out to you. Enemies hit by the Keg Smash will take an additional 8% damage from you alone, nobody else, just you. And for 10 seconds, then it stacks up to 4 times. This has been extended a bit, and the damage is a bit upped as well. So, from a general Brewmaster community perspective, I get the impression that this is the one that is being recommended for raids. It is also being recommended generally if you just need an overall Brewmaster Covenant, just because it is it's great defensively with Mastery and offensively with Mastery, because Mastery also grants you attack power. Very good for opening pools, establishing initial aggro. You can imagine, Keg Smash, use this, Keg Smash, Keg Smash, Keg. And it synergizes very well with, of course, the Keg Smash Legendary, which gives you 2 charges of Keg Smash and also ups its damage by 30%. So that is going to be a very popular combination going into Shadowlands. There are a lot of people going Kyrian because they are very strong and because they have a certain soulbind that works a certain way and is certainly very good. So, as I mentioned before, the Conduit Strike with Clarity has been quite heavily nerfed. I think it extends the time to 35 seconds from 30, but the mastery increase has been greatly diminished. So at the moment, this time of recording, it is not worth taking, really. Go with Walk with the Ox. But of course the Kyrians have a signature ability as well, Summon Steward, which is on a 5-minute cooldown. It is basically a potion that will restore 20% of your health and remove curses, diseases and poisons, as well as bleed effects. Now, as the beginning I said one of the Brewmaster weaknesses was bleed effects. Well, this will remove it. There are some notes about it. It can only be used once an encounter. So, once a raid encounter, you can only use it once. Secondly, until recently it was working on raid mechanics. There are quite a few bleed mechanics in Castle Nathria, the first raid. That has been taken away from you now, and from the dwarves, incidentally. So it's not going to be effective against all of those. There will be certain mechanics in the game where the bleed cannot be removed, and most people are taking it for the bleed. But a 20% health potion, which is not shared with the 5-minute health potion cooldown, is also a great moment. In terms of soulbinds, it's absolutely obvious that you go with Pelagos. This is just a sample table of what you might want to pick. I've gone with Scalding Brew, Harm Denial, Walk with the Ox, and Dizzying Tumble. So 2 potencies, 1 endurance, 1 finesse conduit. Now, the top and bottom talents, Combat Meditation and Let Go of the Past, are wonderful. They've been nerfed a couple of times because they were way too wonderful, but and there's still a slight danger that they might get picked upon again. Yeah, it's a very, very solid starting covenant, and a very, very solid starting soulbind as well. So, if you want to get out of the blocks, Pelagos and Kyrian, good choice. Right, on to the Necrolords. Now, our Necrolord friends have an ability called Bone Dust Brew, which is a 1-minute cooldown, which is reducible with brew usage, so the usage of Keg Smash and Tiger Palm. So, you target a brew explosion onto the ground. For 10 seconds, it has a 50% chance to do an additional amount of healing or damage every time you use an ability. So, that can add up quite quickly. There is no internal cooldown on that either, so, if you just get lucky, you can have a whole string of procs and do a lot of damage and healing in that 10-second window. Using Keg Smash or Tiger Palm during Bone Dust Brew will reduce the cooldowns on the brews by an additional second. So that's very good too. That also includes Bone Dust Brew itself, so you can reduce the cooldown of Bone Dust Brew by using Keg Smash and Tiger Palm inside Bone Dust Brew. So it's really does start to add up. The Conduit recently was nerfed, and it limited the cooldown potential. Because there was no internal cooldown, you could basically, hit AoE abilities and reduce Bone Dust Brew to a ridiculously short amount of time before it was up again. Now they've limited the cooldown reduction to 2.5 seconds, which is 5 procs inside that 10-second window. So that has taken a bit of the edge off it. It doesn't affect the healing and the damage components of this in any way. There's still no internal cooldown on those, so it can go nuts. Its widest ability is rather strong in AoE situations, and then not so much in single target, just because, you know, there are less things to hit, less chance of it to proc, less things ticking around, because you're probably not using spinning crane kick on single target, because that would be weird. The cooldown nerf is also, of course, heavily impacted, you know, the time that Bone Dust Brew is going to come back up again, so it's not going to be used as frequently, but it was way out in front. It did need to be pulled back into line, and it has been pulled into a fairly straight line with all of the other Covenant abilities, so in that respect, it was a good change. Now for the Necrolord's signature ability, which is Fleshcraft on a 2-minute cooldown. It is basically a 4-second channel that gives you a 20% health shield. That can increase up to 50% of your health depending on how many corpses are nearby, so fairly disgusting ability, but you know, hey, it's Necrolords, they're filthy. Channeled abilities in general are not good for tanks, mainly because for the vast majority of the time channeled abilities do not enable you to parry, block or dodge, and this is no exception. So not terribly useful in that respect, and unless you go into specific soulbinds and pick specific soulbind abilities, you won't even be able to move with Fleshcraft. So you're just standing there channeling for 4 seconds. But Emily has the ability to move while channeling, and the Marrowless soulbind has a very interesting one where you gain different buffs according to the corpses that you're picking up your buffs from. And there's quite a few of them, there's like 10. So yeah, that's an interesting play on it. It's still probably easily... it is easily my least favourite of the Covenant signature abilities for Brewmasters. Now, when I went through the soulbinds not so long ago, I went with Marrowleth, and I'm sticking with him, that strange beaky old dude. Squatting Brewharm Dinar Bone Marrow Hops, because it is an actual good Covenant conduit, and is in Tumble to finish. So a Volatile Solvent is the one that enables you to get different buffs off the different types of corpses. So yeah, that's very, very interesting. Ultimate Form also restores quite a lot of health, and you get you become immune to CC as well. So that improves Fleshcraft. And Fleshcraft wasn't a very strong ability to start with, but at least that makes it more interesting. And you know, it has a few additional buffs to it. So yeah, that's why I would go with Marrowleth. I mean, the oozes that are being picked in this particular row as well are really, really good in terms of protecting you and lessening the durability damage on your equipment. So I think it's a pretty solid tanking option if you're going Necrolord. The Venthyr. Yeah. Okay. Fallen Order is the Covenant ability for the Venthyr. It is a 3-minute cooldown. It is not reducible by any acts of God whatsoever. 8 Fallen Monks appear over 24 seconds out of a special portal. And they all cast Breath of Fire, Enveloping Mists, or Fists of Fury, depending on what type they are, whether they're, you know, tanks, damage dealers, or healers. It is a lovely burst ability. If you're after a fire and forget kind of ability that does a high amount of damage in a short window, it's really, really useful for that. Thematically, not really. Yeah, I'm not really digging the whole Fallen Monks things. It's you might have to do some additional pet control. You have no control over what types of monks come out, so you know you might get a whole bunch of healing monks, which isn't much of a damage boost to you. It has been pared back considerably from its earlier, where it was just deleting people. So it's been brought back into line with the Kyrians and the Necrolords. But you know, if you're really after something where you just sort of press it and then send them in and they do their thing and that's it, and you need that like a burst damage ability, then by all means go Venthyr, take Fallen Order. Just bear in mind that all of the damage that they do does not transfer any threat to you as the Brewmaster. Okay, they'll be doing their own thing. And the Venthyr signature ability, Door of Shadows, is a 1-minute cooldown. It is a targetable port to another location. It's not instant cast, I think it's 1.5 second cast. And, you know, it is subject to the usual problems associated with pathing issues. If anyone who's used Heroic Leap as a warrior can probably understand what I'm talking about here, or anyone who has blinked as a mage. They used to have some terrible issues as well. Now they said they've been doing some pathing work, so maybe it's not going to be as bad as I think it's probably going to be. It's definitely being looked at for some Mythic Plus dungeon strats, you know, skipping trash packs, etc. It would require you all to be Venthir in order for you to pull that off, I would think. But anyway, so yeah, it's a teleport. It's alright. Now I'm sticking with the Draven Soulbind for Venthir because, I mean, Service and Stone by itself is an amazing soulbind ability. I'm astonished that they haven't nerfed this along with everything else. Oh god, I've just tempted fate, haven't I? Anyway, it's the top pick and away you go. It went with Dizzying Tumble, Scalding Brew, Harmed and Arn, and Imbued Reflections, which is the Covenant Conduit, because it's actually good. It's not exciting, but it is good. And yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a stand your ground at the bottom where you gain a 10% additional stamina if you just stand still. Not really a monk trait in general, standing still, but, you know, take it. And Unbreakable Body is also an amazing ability. So, you know, you've got a lot of great tanky abilities in here, and so, you know, if you want to go Venthir, I think Draven is definitely recommended. It is the last on the tier, so you will have to wait a while. Quite a few weeks, in fact, before you actually get to access the dude, but once you do, it will probably very much be worth it. And finally we get to the Night Fae Covenant ability, Feline Stomp. 30-second cooldown. Places a pretty Feline on the ground that deals nature damage to up to 5 enemies. Yes, it's another of those target capped abilities. It does heal your allies and it grants you 5% additional stagger for 8 seconds. Also has a 6% chance to reset itself if you use any abilities while standing on it. So there have been a lot of changes to this ability over time. It is the one I'm going with because I've just decided aesthetically wise that I'm going with Night Fae, so I'm going to have Feline Stomp. It does a lot less damage than it used to. That damage has kind of been brought into line with the other 3 Covenant abilities though. I mean, if you see the logs, it's around 6-7% of your overall damage is now Feline Stomp, assuming that you're using it when it does reset. I have seen instances where people have sort of forgotten to press it, and, you know, it drops to 2%. But, you know, if you're using it properly, it's okay damage-wise. Healing-wise, quite surprising, because the heal itself isn't that big. You know, it's 1.2 to 1.6k usually, sort of in that area. And, you know, going out to people, I mean, that's not particularly impressive. I mean, even my useless little level 50 monk has 22k health, so, you know, it's like, that's not really that big, but it does add up. And of course, it's resetting all the time, and so it's quite a nice continuous aura of healing going out to your allies. So it's actually stronger than I gave it credit for, so not too bad after all. The 5% additional stagger, if you do need additional defensive capacity, then yes, this is a very good way to go as well. There are a couple of problems with the ability, of course. Do we really need the additional stagger? Probably not. It is a decent option in Mythic Plus. It really is designed for Mythic Plus. It's not much of a single target ability. And it does really require you to stay on the Feline. Because if you don't, then you can't reset it. If you can't reset it, you can't get the additional damage and healing out of it. So if you've got particularly uncooperative healers and damage dealers, then this could be a rather difficult ability to use effectively. Now, the Night Fae signature ability is Soul Shape, which is a 1.5 minute cooldown, which morphs you into a little Vulpin, and you teleport forward 15 yards, and I think you have a 50% speed increase that lasts for 12 seconds, or indefinitely, if you're in a rest area, so that's nice. As in, the ability is indefinite. Otherwise it will last for 12 seconds if you're just out in the field. Important to clarify that. So ultimately, do we need another movement ability? No, but this is kind of fun. And it's another port, and, you know, if you've been playing Monk for a while, you just love to zip around all over the place anyway, right? So yeah, another, yeah, I'll take it. Beautiful. And you can also, they've kind of created a Pokemon minigame out of this, because you can actually go around and acquire different forms as well. You can be a rabbit or a moth or a moose or a hamster. Actually, I don't think you can be a hamster. Put a hamster in. But, you know, there's a variety of different shapes, and, you know, a moose is the closest I'm going to get to a cow in this game, so fine. I'll go and get the moose one, wherever it is. So I'm going to change my pick. I was Karain in the previous video. I'm going to go with Nia instead. Scalding Brew, Dizzying Tumble, Harm Denial, and then a choice between Way of the Fae and Walk with the Ox, depending on how you're feeling. I mean, I'm going to go with Way of the Fae because I'm still hoping for buffs for the damage anyway. Growth Invigoration, which is the top talent, is very, very good indeed. It gets a nice solid health boost and a lot of mastery. And Nia's Tool's Poison, as long as you're interrupting on a regular basis, is also pretty potent too. So, you know, this is probably the way I'm going to go for. The other option is possibly you could take Swift Patrol instead of the bag. That will increase your speed by 20% for 2 minutes until you go into combat again. So that's another thing to consider. Now, at some point in every Brewmaster's life, they get the need to be legendary. And what better way to become legendary than to use legendary powers? And this is one of their features that we're getting in Shadowlands. We will be starting out with just one choice, and then we'll probably go up from there. If you are looking for legendary powers, don't look at any of the general ones. None of them are any good for us anymore. We did have a little bit of excitement with Vitality Sacrifice, when it was actually good, but they changed it and now it's not. What is good though is Stormstout's Last Keg. 30% increased keg smash damage, and it is 2 charges. 2 charges can mean that you can just double keg smash on the pull, which is always very nice, but it also gives you an additional keg smash to play around with. If your rotation has been thrown out a little, you always have that keg smash available. You do have the brew reduction associated with that as well. It does, as I have mentioned before, synergize very well with the Curian ability, and is just generally recommended as a legendary power for people, and it's recommended to go on gloves. The reason being that there is a very nice shoulder piece that drops in Castle Nathria as well, and it has a higher eye level than the gloves equivalent, so it makes more sense to put the legendary power on the gloves. That said, I'm going with Charred Passions, and this is because I have dropped Rushing Jade Wind from my talents, and I'm going to go with an Exploding Keg and Spinning Crane Kick build. And Charred Passions are basically, every time I use Breath of Fire, there's an 8-second window where I do 100% additional damage as fire if I use my Blackout Kick or my Spinning Crane Kick. So it does mean those first 8 seconds or so I can just Spinning Crane Kick around all the AoE mobs and get 100% additional damage as fire, which is quite high. So there's a lot of potential for burst there, you know, and not so much in the downtimes. That's part of the trade-off, and you know, that's the way I'm going, so I'm going to be picking up that one first, and probably then picking up Stormstout's Last Keg second. Finally, Fatal Touch. This is going to be my third legendary power if we ever get that choice, because it is incredibly fun. You know, Touch of Death coming back has been great to play around with. It is an incredibly fun ability, and you know, it's nice to have fun abilities every once in a while. I'm definitely not a first choice, but you know, reducing the cooldown from 3 minutes to 1 minute means that you just spew bloop, bloop, bloop. Great fun. So yeah, if I get the chance to wear a third, it will be the Fatal Touch. Now we're sort of crossing over to a world where legendary powers are really quite bad. Mighty Paw. This has been debated quite hotly about how effective it really is. What it does essentially is it grants you 25% additional armor when you press Celestial Brew, and it has a 25% chance not to consume a charge of Purifying Brew, so you can get more Purifying Brew, more Purified Cheese Stacks, more Celestial Brews, and you have that additional armor up the front. First of all, to clear up the armor bit, armor is not a stat that we really go for as Brewmasters. We're not designed around it. You know, we don't have a shield, we're not wearing plate. Our whole thing is to, you know, get hit and then stagger it into the dot. Even if you're in cutting edge, top of the line, taking catastrophic damage, I still think there are better legendaries than this to take. The armor, if anything, is more of a drawback than anything else because it points out, you know, one of the main flaws with its design. I think you'd be better off with something else, personally. You know, if you want to take it, okay, but just bear in mind that, you know, 25% armor does sound like a lot, but it's only really a little more than 4% damage reduction, and only physical, of course. So, I'm not terribly excited by that. Shadowhouse Might. If it wasn't for rollout, this would be the meme legendary for Brewmasters this year. It's based upon an ability called Facepalm from Legion, where you stack 3 Facepalm relics and you basically got these crazily good Tiger Palms out of it. Single target damage went through the roof, and it was all good times for everyone. That was about a 70% proc. This is a 10%. For some reason, completely beyond the ability of any Brewmasters to understand, it got nerfed. Damage was too high, apparently. What damage? Anyway, it's not good, so don't take it. Thank you. I have heard talk of Invoker's Delight being used, so it's like a mini Bloodlust every time you use Nizal, the Black Ox. No. You know how I feel about that stat that we do not mention. So, no. There just isn't a situation where you would ever take this legendary either over Charred Passions or Storm Stout's Last Keg, unless you were just doing a meme build for the lulz. For PvP, I don't PvP a lot, but if I ever do in Shadowlands, it will be using Escape from Reality. You know, the additional porting option, get around the corner, and then those Vivifies are stronger and have a chance to be really powerful. That is a much better option than Rollout. Rollout is can't be CC'd while rolling. You shouldn't be able to be CC'd while rolling anyway. It's not very good. Moving on to stats and stat priority. Be aware that, you know, once you go past 30% in any particular secondary stat, that you are going to be subject to the new diminishing returns, which means it's going to get increasingly more difficult for you as you go up in percentages to stack a certain secondary stat. The stat priority is pretty much unchanged. Eye level is still pretty much the most important thing that you need to be considering here when looking for upgrades. If you do want to go offensively, you know, crit and versatility, which is the build I'm going to be going for. I'm going for a more offensive build. Are going to be my 2 favourites. Mastery is going to be a very close second because it does increase my attack power, and you know, it still gives me a great defensive value as well. And then haste, right down the bottom there, right at the back. You know, it's not the end of the world if you pick up gear with haste on it. It's just don't go out of your way to try and get it. Defensive wise, versatility is still, I mean, it's not fun, not interesting, not innovative, but it is good. And a mastery. Go for mastery, go a little more defensive, and then, you know, crit left over, and, you know, haste as a last resort. If you fancy a snowflake build, if you want that haste build that badly, then by all means, stack haste to the gills. Have your half-second keg smash cooldowns. And you know, you can just have Master Tillicrit at the end. You know, whatever's left over. Not a good idea, but okay. Enchants wise, I've been looking around at a lot of logs and a lot of different comments and stuff, and this is like the general gist of where we think we're going with enchants at the moment. For weapons, Lightless Force does seem to be the best pick. It is kind of designed for, you know, DPS doing AoE, but it is really, really good for tanks doing AoE as well. If you can put a Lightless Force in each weapon, if you're dual wielding, because we can dual wield now, that's great. Double proc. Does some decent damage. 6 to 7 to 8% of your overall damage is probably going to be just the Lightless Force proc. Well worth putting on if you get a decent set of weapons. For chest, we are very, very disappointingly limited. There is one called Eternal Skirmish, which looked very promising. It's plus 20 to your agility, and then you have a chance to do additional shadow damage every once in a while when you're doing melee spells, and melee tends to be about 15% of our overall damage profile. So unfortunately, the DPS itself is bad. I mean, you could put it on, you might get an extra 1.5 to 2% DPS out of it. So if you want to go that way, then by all means, but I'm certainly not going to be recommending Eternal Skirmish. Eternal Stats is plus 30 to everything. All of your stats. And Eternal Bulwark is basically as an enchant that gives you an additional 25 armor plus the stats of 20 stats. Now, that additional 25 armor at my level 50 is an additional 1.5% physical damage reduction. So, you know, it will save a little from going into the stagger, but not really enough that I'd actually care about it. And, you know, if it stays at 25 armor, then the more you level up and the more gear you get and the higher your armor level, the less effective this becomes. So for me, it's not really a goer at all. Cloak-wise, there is one called Fortified Leech, which gives you an additional 30 leech, and in testing it looks like it's doing about 2% of your overall healing. So, you know, if you do fancy that, by all means go for it. I'm personally going to go for another one called Fortified Avoidance, which, as you might have guessed, puts another 30 avoidance onto your cloak, which is about 5 or 6% additional avoidance, which will reduce the amount of damage that you're getting from AoE abilities. So for me, because I'll probably be, you know, pulling large packs or just doing dungeons, then, you know, that kind of makes more sense for me. For feat, there's a couple of agility ones. Eternal Agility is the top one, which is plus 15 agi. It's not massive. Take it if you want. There are some other enchants which are not really, they're useful. The utility ones, like, you know, a reduced hearthstone and additional Shadowlands Gathering for your mining, skinning, and herbing on the gloves. Because I think the gloves are otherwise, I think they have strength on the gloves, and the strength is a useless stat for you, so you might as well just get Shadowlands Gathering. It'll definitely help you over the course of the expansion. For the other enchants, there are 2 levels of ring enchants. As normal, you get but the tenet is the higher one, so, you know, it's the tenet of critical strike, or the tenet of versatility, or the tenet of mastery, or the tenet of the other stat that we do not talk of. So take your pick of the first 3, crit, versatility, or mastery, and stick them on your rings. Usually I just go for versatility because it kind of works offensively and defensively. It's just the way that it is. But, you know, that's entirely up to you. I have seen in logs people using the new weapon oils. Now, Shadow Core is a DPS one. Doesn't do a lot of DPS, but it does have a chance to proc additional shadow damage. It should be between 30 and 40 DPS. Additional to whatever you're doing already, and it's 30 to 40 HPS in terms of healing for the embalming oil, which basically it heals you, and if you're already at full, it will turn that healing into a mini shield instead, which is fine. It's usually about 2% either side, so increased damage and healing. It's up to you whether you use them, if you want to max or not. That's entirely up to you. I'm just putting it out there. The sharpening stones and shaded weight stones are another option instead of the oils if you don't want to go with those, and they will increase your attack power by 20 for an hour. So it's for sharp and blunt weapons basically. That is about, it's about a 3% attack power increase for me at level 50. Because it's a set amount of 20 though, you know, once my attack power goes through the roof, as you know, eye level inflation, we know this is going to happen, you know, it's going to have diminishing returns, definitely. It's not going to be nearly as good. So it might be a decent option early on, but further down the line, I don't really see it being that useful. But if you are going to use the sharpening stones, then by all means, dual wield and get double the fun. So yes, that's everything. Just some final thoughts, just to go over, you know, if you're considering a Brewmaster or you're looking at the different options that are going around. The modern WoW tank is built around the idea that it already has the tools it needs to tank effectively, and that you gear defensively to the point where you're comfortable with your tankiness, you're not being a liability to anyone, you're not doing anything too silly, you have plenty of abilities to save yourself, and then you start gearing offensively. I think, you know, during the course of, you know, just leveling, just get through the leveling, that's fine. Once you start picking up gear, you will be able to work out the point where you don't feel quite so spiky, you're feeling nice and controlled, you're comfortable in the content. That's when you go for it. That's when you start going for the more offensive stuff. And it doesn't just apply to gear, it applies to covenants, it applies to the soulbinds, the conduits, enchants, the sockets, everything. You know, start with a two-hander, try and get to dual wield, put the lightless forces on, get yourself some additional damage. You know, all of those enchants and consumables and stuff, you know, individually they don't make a lot of difference, but you put them all together and all of a sudden you are a much more offensive minded tank. Although we did get buffed by 11% threat wise for all tanks across the board, 11% isn't an awful lot, so it does mean that you are still going to have to stay awake while you're tanking. You know, it's not a case of where you're just going to hit spinning crane kick and we're done here. You know, there are going to be very good DPSs out there who are going to pull off you rather easily if that's all you're doing to get the mob's attention. So once again, this is where damage becomes important again, because damage translates to threat. But as I've already mentioned in this video and in previous ones, the best covenant for you in Shadowlands is the one you like the best. If you go Venthyr and you hate Venthyr and you hate looking after them in their stupid party and their little edgelord and their stupid costumes and their Revendreth and I don't like Venthyr, so I'm not going Venthyr. The only exception really is if you are, you know, one of those cutting-edge brewmastery types that are, you know, potentially going to gimp your entire raid, then okay, fine. Take a covenant you don't really like. But otherwise, you know, you are basically down for enjoyment. If you take a covenant you don't like, you're not going to be playing your Brewmaster for long anyway. And so yes, those are the Brewmastery thoughts. I think we're in a great place. I think we're a strong tank. I think all four of our covenants are pretty well balanced at this point. You know, we've got a few interesting foibles, a few completely useless talents that you should never take, and you know, a few different ways of brewmastering as well. I'm looking forward to just experimenting and seeing how much damage I can do with my my spinning crane kick charm passions combo. Our damage is increased quite substantially after recent Keck Smash changes, so you know, we're not one of the lower damaging tanks anymore, which is very satisfying. But I probably won't see you until Shadowlands actually launches now, so that's a bit exciting, isn't it? If there are any additional changes, last minute doozies, I'm sure there will be a couple, and there'll definitely be some after the first raid results are in. You know, I will always keep you updated. Yeah, so I hope you enjoy your early adventures in the Shadowlands, and I'll see you there. If you see Sylvanas before I do, by all means, you know, just give it a little pop in the nose. What you doing, you crazy lady? Can't wait to see her again. So I'll see all of you crazy cats on the other side. But for now, this is the Conspicuous Moon, and a very good evening to you.